Welcome to the Gen Z Journey, where we work with you through an entrepreneurial lens to build a wholesome perspective on life and build both our business and personal dreams together. Join our community on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Gen Z Journey. So, hello and welcome to another Gen Z Journey podcast. You're joined here today by me and Aaron hosting the podcast, and then we're joined by Christian Buhl. I'll get him to introduce himself in 1 second, but like I always say at the start of these podcasts is we really just want you to get to know our guests very intimately and dig into a little bit of their background so you can see how they got to the point in which they are now and just really learn from their journey that they've been on through, whether it be entrepreneurship or wherever it be. You just really learn from their journey. So Christian, if you could give us just a short kind of minute introduction of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Christian Buhl. I'm currently a director of technical product management at Riot Games. Right now, I'm leading what we call the sustainability initiative on League of Legends. And essentially, that means that I'm accountable for everything on League of Legends that isn't player facing. So tools, technology, services, backend, all of those things are the things that my teams are responsible for.
In case you guys don't remember, League of Legends is my favorite game, so this is an awesome interview for me.
It's my favorite game too. So.
All right then, let's dig kind of straight into the meat of this podcast, Christian. And I want to dig first into your background and I'm going to ask you the question of how did you get into kind of game development and into that realm?
Yeah, so I've been a huge gamer my whole life. I started as a kid. We got our first computer when I was probably 8 or 9, and it was like a CGA computer back in the 80s, so pretty old stuff. But I played a ton of games on that. I've always been super passionate about gaming and interested in gaming. I went to school, I went to college and got a computer engineering degree, and I kind of knew that I wanted to get into either gaming or simulations. I wanted to do that kind of, interactive interactive technology stuff. Um, yeah, and I actually, when I was in college, I had an internship where I was working on Navy simulators, and so that gave me kind of some of the technical background for gaming. And through that, I actually got connected with a project that the Army was running it was called the Army Game Project at the time. Eventually turned into a game called America's Army. So I was actually the first engineer hired for that project. Helped kind of build America's Army into what it eventually became. And for those who don't know, America's Army I think it still is a game developed and released by the U.S. Army, essentially for recruiting purposes. It's kind of like play the game. If you like the Army, there's a link to sign up in the game. But yeah, so I worked on that for a couple years. About 5 years actually, and eventually became the lead engineer for that game. And then when I left there, I went to work for EA Sports, where I worked on the NCAA football franchise. And I'm a huge college football fan. Like college football is one of my passions in life. I went to UCF, I mentioned, and they're pretty good at football right now, assuming we have football this year. So it's been a pretty good couple of years as a UCF football fan. But yeah, I'm a huge college football fan, so it was awesome kind of getting to work on a game that I loved. I just remember that every day I would go in, or every Monday we actually had a meeting set aside that was like 2 hours where all we did was talk about the games that happened on the weekend. And it was just an awesome thing. Like part of my job was just talking about football and the things that I loved. Um, and I started as an engineer on that as well. Eventually became the technical director for the NCAA football franchise. So I kind of had oversight over all the engineering and technology for that game. Then, unfortunately, that game was canceled. There were a bunch of complicated legal reasons around why that game was canceled. But then I moved over to work on Madden NFL football. And I like the NFL, but I don't love the NFL the way I love college football. And so it was just kind of interesting for me for the first time in my career. I was working on something I liked but didn't love. Um, and it wasn't bad. I liked it. I would still be there if I hadn't had other opportunities. But eventually eventually I left there. I moved within EA and went to work on the Frostbite engine, which is kind of a game, and uh, it's the proprietary game engine that EA is now using for all of their games. That was another thing that I liked but didn't love. And really, the thing is, when I was there, I realized that I had been there for over a year and had never loaded a level that was an actual game. I was loading and working on levels that were like, some cubes rolling down a ramp to test our physics, and a bunch of spheres in a room with a bunch of lighting to test our lighting, right? Because I was kind of on the core engine team and not really seeing games anymore. And I'm in games because I love games, not because I love technology. So then I actually got contacted by Riot Games. I wasn't seeking them out, but they contacted me. And League of Legends at that time was already my favorite game. I had probably been playing it pretty hardcore for 4 or 5 years at the time. And so it was kind of an opportunity to go back to what I had on NCAA football, where I was working on the thing that I loved. Um, and I've been at Riot now for about 4 years. I still play League of Legends almost every day. I still love League of Legends, the game, the IP, the world around it. And so, yeah, so now I've been at Riot for about 4 years, and probably will be here a lot longer.
Amazing. That's
Awesome.
and I believe you and Aaron have an interesting story of meeting on League of Legends. Am I correct, or something in relation to
Yeah,
that?
we
We were
played a game.
just
I think you were on the other team and you won, right? Right.
no, we were actually on the same team, but
Oh, were we? Okay.
I was playing with him, and it was a decent game, and he did pretty good, and I added him, and I actually was wondering if there was any remote only opportunities at Riot. Just as a job, because I love the video game so much myself, and so I asked him if there were, and there weren't. But then I decided to just ask if he'd be interested in sharing his LinkedIn, saw his profile, saw how much experience he had in just directing various video games and all that, and I thought it'd be an awesome opportunity to just hear what it's like to pursue someone's passion in video games, because I've heard so many people of our generation be like, I love video games and I want to grow up to do that. And so, here he is, the embodiment of someone growing up and loving video games and pursuing that passion and work for them and really, really develop them. So,
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what really struck me about you, Christian, is that like you pay real attention to what you were passionate about, in terms of, you said you liked but you didn't love some of the games that you're working on, some of the, like Frostbite, you liked it but you didn't love it, and when you were really pursuing your passions, that was where you were having the most fun. And I think that's really awesome and amazing for like me as a young person to hear, is that, yeah, if you really pursue what you enjoy and what brings you real genuine happiness, then you can have what I'm sure you would say is a pretty amazing time and an enjoyable job, no?
Yeah, definitely. And the fact of the matter is that making games is hard work, right? Like you may have heard stories about like crunch and hell cycles and kind of the bad parts of game development. The fact is, a lot of that is true. I've gone through a lot of that in my career. Um, and in fact, you know, I got into games because I was passionate about games. I wanted to make great games. And actually, over the course of my career, I look back and there's actually only one game that I ever worked on that I didn't feel like was a great game, that I'm not proud of, that I worked on. Um, and that was NCAA Football '08. And what happened with that game was we had kind of this mandate uh, uh, from EA that said, we've got to replace all of our UI with another UI system. And I won't go into too many details, but the TLDR is it was this massive amount of work that created kind of a hell cycle. Um, and we had really bad kind of process from our leadership, like uh, our leaders wouldn't cut any features, right? It was all about like how much stuff can we cram into the game. And it ended up being like, a super long alpha with 60, 70, 80, 90-hour weeks ramping up. Also, my first child was born literally the week we started alpha. I took 2 weeks off, then went back to work, and didn't see my wife or daughter for several months effectively. And at the end of it, I was like, I love making games, but first of all, this game that we made wasn't very good. It was buggy. It had a ton of features, and none of them were that good. And in fact, I remember standing in a circle with a bunch of designers and engineers at the end of the cycle, kind of commiserating over how miserable this cycle had been. And one of the designers was like, "Hey guys, I know this was really rough, but look at these features. We did this and this and this and this and this and this." And he just rattled off this huge list of features. And I remember having this kind of moment of clarity that was like, that's what's wrong with this game. We did a bunch of shit and none of it was any good. Like, some of those features could have been great, but they weren't, because we got that feature done. Now let's do something else. Um, and I kind of decided that I wasn't gonna stay in the game industry and keep working on games if it was gonna be that terrible to work on them, right? So I kind of, originally I was in games because I wanted to make great games, and I realized that and I kind of added another kind of core motivation, that was I wanted to make making games great. And so a lot of the rest of my career has been focused on um, building tools and process and improving kind of the way we develop games, so that first of all, I didn't have to go through a 90-hour alpha again, but also so that nobody else did, right? Like, I was like, I'm not going to, even if the game had been great, like, working 90 hours a week for like multiple weeks in a row isn't sustainable and isn't healthy. We had kind of had this attitude that, like, we're going to take shortcuts, we're going to like we're going to hack things together, we're going to do things in a bad way, because some other guy some later is going to have to deal with it. Like, fuck the guy who's working on this game next year, they got to deal with this shit we're doing. And I'm like, that's us. Like, we're the people making the game next year, right? Like, I don't want to screw me over next year just to take some shortcut this year. And so a lot of the rest of my career has been focused on building tools, building process, improving kind of the way we develop games, so that I can work on the games I love without, like, sacrificing my life to do it.
Definitely, definitely. And that's good to know. Two things that I just learning from this is that first, quality over quantity. It's important to realize that in your life, whether it's working on a video game, whether you're working on your own business, whatever you're doing, that the quality is just as important as the quantity of what you put out there. A good example is Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos actually it states countless times that he only makes 3 good decisions a day, and that's sufficient for him. And the big part about that is that you're taking the time to actually make sure that the decision making and the choices that you're doing are very quality, and that they'll create a positive impact, rather than just spewing out a whole bunch of stuff and hoping it goes well.
I was just going to say that was really cool that you shared. Actually, it was a pretty key experience in your career there. Of you had that hell cycle, and you didn't want to repeat that again. So it altered your path, and it's like, okay, so instead of making games, I wanna improve the processes around it, so people don't have to experience that hell again. And I was just going to ask you, were there any other kind of key either experiences or individuals throughout your journey that have really changed the shape or influenced the direction of your career or of your journey,
Uh, yeah, so I can actually talk about kind of one of the key mentors in my career. His name is Daniel Martin. He was the technical director on NCAA football before I became the technical director. Um, Later left to go be the CTO of BioWare. Just a really, really amazing kind of person to work with. And I actually remember, like, he gave me a lot of good advice over the course of my career, especially kind of in that time period as I was transitioning from kind of, I'll say, like, junior leadership roles into more senior leadership roles. Um, I remember he actually had this knack for pointing out everything that you did wrong, and, like, really just honing in on it and saying, hey, like, this is the thing you did, and here's what was wrong, and here's why. And I actually remember that, like, I would have one-on-ones with him that would be like, he would spend, this a bit of hyperbole, but he would spend like the first 5 minutes saying, my time is valuable, I'm spending this time because I think I think it's worth my time to spend with you, right? So that tiny bit of reinforcement up front that was like, hey, he saw like my potential and things that I could do. And then the rest of that one-on-one was him telling me everything I was doing wrong and like what I needed to improve. But it was actually, I mean, you know, it was immensely valuable for me. You know, he talked about how, you know, just for example, one of the things I still remember is, um, you know, he pointed out that at the time I was very keen to agree to do things, right? Like, hey, here's a problem, I'll solve it, I'll take care of it. And he was like, you know, you promised to do a bunch of things, and the things that you deliver on are good, but it looks bad when you say you'll do 4 things and only do 2 or 3, right? And so that was a great piece of advice. Was like, you know, the core of it was like learn when to say no, right? And it's better to say no when you can't do something than to say yes and try to please everyone. Um, that's just kind of,
It's that idea of like don't bite more than you can chew. So
yeah. And like he saw that like I was saying yes to things because, you know, because I was passionate, I wanted to improve things, I wanted to get things done. But you know what you know, a very kind of closely related lesson is if you tell someone you'll give them 50 whatevers and you deliver 60, that looks great. But if you tell them you're going to give them 70 and you deliver 60, that looks bad, right? And so part of it is setting expectations appropriately and letting people know like, hey, here's the thing that I'm going to do, and deliver that or more. Don't overpromise and underdeliver. So those were just some of the kind of the key learnings I remember from him. But again, like, you know, one of the key learnings was honestly like learn, what am I trying to say? Spend your mentoring time wisely, right? Like he was making it clear to me that like his time was valuable, and him spending time with me was because, you know, I had potentially wanted to help me. But yeah, that was, you know, probably one of my key mentors throughout my career.
That's awesome. Yeah, yeah. And would you say also then that it's quite key that who you surround yourself with as well? Was that really important in terms of your journey?
Yeah, you know, that's interesting because, you know, obviously for a lot of my career, I was, what am I trying to say? Um, I joined teams, right? Like you know, as an engineer, you don't have like a lot of choice early in your career about like who you surround yourself with because like you're joining a team. Um, but like I happen to be on to get put onto some really, really strong teams. You know, like the NCAA football team was a team full of incredibly passionate people. Um, and I think one of the things I learned from that was, uh, passion for what you're doing, and being around people who are passionate for what you're doing is way better than like smarts. And not to say that the people on NCAA weren't smart, um, but you know, for example, uh, you know, again, I'm not saying anything bad about Madden, but when I was working on Madden, I didn't feel that from myself. I didn't feel it as much from everyone else who was working on Madden. Like the NCAA team was just full of people who were like insanely crazy college football fans, right? And it showed in like the passion we did, and it showed in like how we executed on things. Um, and you know, we were always kind of the little brother to Madden, right? You know, Madden had like 3 or 4 times the revenue that we did, so obviously like they got a lot more attention, but we got almost as much, or sometimes I felt like we made a better game than Madden did just because we were more passionate about the product we were making.
That's so cool. That's so cool in terms of, and what I wanted to, you kind of just touched on there of how it showed itself, but like when you in comparison, you can compare Madden or whatever, but in comparison to working on a team where they're all real passionate about the game and what you're creating, as opposed to where like they like it but they're not, as that deep passion is not ingrained into them. What's the difference? You know, what, working on a team where you're passionate about that, how does it affect creativity? How does it affect work? Like what does that feel like? Because I think a lot of the time people can understand it, but they don't really know how it feels like, or what it looks like. So could you just kind of just give people an image of that?
Yeah, so I guess there are a couple things. One is, you know, when people are passionate, they just work harder on things. They're more They pay more attention to detail. And even though like I, for example, was mostly working on like boring technical stuff, like I was doing it so that we could make the awesome game, right? And so I was super motivated to like improve the build times of our compile because it was going to help our other people like make the football game, right? And so and another part was when you have a bunch of people who are passionate about things, you know, like I said, we had these 2-hour meetings where we just talked about college football, and we'd throw around ideas. Hey, could we do this? Could we do this? And like, I was an engineer, and then when I first joined, I was an engineer, right? Like, I no leadership role. I'm just an engineer on a team, but like, I was super passionate about college football, and when I had opinions, people listened because like that's what we cared about. We didn't care if you were an engineer or designer, and like I wasn't accountable for putting together designs, but I gave a lot of feedback on designs, right? And when I worked on features, like I worked with the designer, and like at the end, like there was definitely some of my DNA in not just the fact that I had implemented some of the things or designed the tech behind it, but like what we were doing and why. Like there were things that I said, hey, I don't think this part of the feature matters for a college football fan, and then those things got taken out, or like, hey, I'd really like to see this instead, and those things got added. And so it wasn't like we had one guy whose job was make this feature and then he went or figured out what it was. We had engineers and artists and people who had strong opinions because they watched college football, they loved it, they understood it, and they gave opinions on it. And I mean, to be honest, it's the same on League of Legends, right? Like I think I mentioned earlier that I'm accountable for non-player facing stuff. Like I have no accountabilities for gameplay or design or anything like that you as a player would see. But like I'm in conversations and I give my opinions on things. And if they may or may not listen, like I'm not accountable for making those decisions. But like everyone knows I love League of Legends. I'm passionate about it. And so my opinions matter. And I get feedback and input. And that's what like that's what it's like when you're on a team full of passionate people. So
I think that's an important thing to know is that when you're on a team of passionate people, like you said, you become and not necessarily an equal to everyone on your team, but your voice is heard, and that's actually something we do here at the Gen Z Journey a lot with us working with Peter, our new Gen Z Journey team member, and as we start to work with other people. And we work with the people that we've interviewed and all that. One of the things that we'd like to really highlight is that we love hearing opinions, and we love hearing differentiating opinions and new ideas, because they bring in that creativity and that innovation within your team. And that's how good products, and that's how good fruition of ideas come to be, is when you have a business environment where you don't feel like you're being suppressed in one way or another.
and I also want to expand on some when you asked about like surrounding yourself with passionate people, right? Early in my career it was you know maybe to some extent it was luck, right? Like I was an engineer. I joined a team. That team happened to be great. I think the America's Army team was also great at the beginning. Um, Later in my career, that became more about like choice of where I was going, right? Like I came, uh, even though I loved League of Legends, I wasn't just going to come work on League of Legends because I loved the game, right? Like when I interviewed, I wasn't, I was interviewing them as much as they were interviewing me. And I mean, um, yeah, and like I talked to the people who work at it. I saw that they had the passion, they had the things that I wanted to, so they were the kinds of people that I wanted to surround myself with, and that was a big part of the reason I joined. And then like now I'm in a leadership position where like I'm accountable for building teams, I'm accountable for hiring people, and so that's one of the things that I'm looking for. So now I do have a much more active role in surrounding myself with passionate people, because like for example, I my delivery lead on my initiative recently moved to take another opportunity within Riot. So then I was able to have a hand in selecting his replacement. I talked to the other candidate, like I made sure that it was somebody that like, hey, this is the kind of person I want to surround myself with, right? Um, so like I've had a much more active role in kind of building teams that I was to surround myself with those kinds of passionate people as I got later in my career. But I think like one of the lessons that I would give to people earlier in the career who aren't like building teams and putting together, your team, your own teams, is to think of an interview and think of those processes as two ways, not one, right? It's not just about like, do they want to hire you? It's, do you want to work for them, right? And that was a huge factor in, that was top of my mind when I was interviewing at Riot. Like, are these people that I want to work for and work with? Um,
And it's awesome that you bring that up because that's actually something that I think about. Even when I was talking to Peter for the first time after Rio introduced me to him, I became very aware that it wasn't just about me asking Peter questions, but I wanted to make sure that Peter knew who I was and who he was deciding to work with and what kind of interaction he would have within that environment. And I actually have done that before too in one of my previous job experiences. And I think that's important to note is just, we're both people. When someone comes into an interview, it's not just someone that you're hiring to do a job, but it's someone that you're going to be with every day. It's someone that you're going to interact with, and you're gonna want to have an environment where you can be happy to go to work because the people that are around you are people that are passionate, people that are caring, people that have an interesting outlook on life and want to really just be involved and active and not someone that's secluded or doesn't want to really partake with what you do.
yeah. Yeah, and like over the course of my career, I've done a ton of interviews, like interviewing people that we're looking to hire, and I've always like saved time in the interview, like 10 or 15 minutes at the end, for them to ask me questions, right? And I tell them, hey, like I want to save the last 10 minutes to turn this around and give you the opportunity to ask me about, Riot or EA or whatever company I was interviewing for. Like, what are your concerns? What do you want to know? Yeah, because like I want to make sure that they feel like they're interviewing us as well, and making a decision for themselves about whether this is somewhere they want to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so my next question for you, Christian, is having had all of that experience and working for Riot Games now, kind of where are you on your journey? What would you say is where you want to go in the future? What's your vision? You said you're really enjoying working for Riot and working on League of Legends, and you can see you can see yourself working there for a lot longer. But just where are you at in your journey now, and where do you want to take things?
Yeah, so maybe I'll kind of start back from the beginning to answer this question. Like I said, I was an engineer when I started. I was an engineer for a long time actually. Um, but I realized that fundamentally, like I don't get satisfaction out of writing code, and that's not to say I don't like writing code, but like my core satisfaction was I want to make games, right? And early in my career, the way I made games and the way I contributed to making games was by writing code, and that was great. I loved it. I still sometimes write code, uh, not professionally, like at home, because writing code is fun. But as I progressed in my career, like I started as an engineer, became a lead engineer, started writing less code, but feeling more and more like I was making games, right? Like I was making more of the game, even if it was indirectly, right? And I remember for example, my first year, the first year that I was technical director on NCAA football, kind of picking up that box at the end of the year, but or or let me back up a bit. I remember previous years I would pick up the box, look at the back of the box, and there'd be a feature that I worked with, right? Like I worked on the team builder feature for NCAA football. Boom, that's on the back of the box. I made that. I made that bullet point. That feels really good, right? My first year as technical director, I remember picking up the box and thinking, like, I made this whole thing, right? Like, of course, many other people made it, but now I was kind of accountable for the whole thing and not just, a bullet point on the back. And that was super satisfying. And I kind of realized, like, that's what I got satisfaction out of, is making games, not in any specific way. Like, I could have kept writing code. I could have kept doing other things, but I moved into leadership roles because I felt more like I was making more of the game. And what am I trying to say? I guess over the course of my career, I felt like I've gotten a role, and in the first phase, I'm like trying to figure out how to get better at that role, right? Like I'm learning, hey, what is this role? What am I doing? What am I supposed to be doing here? And then I kind of get into a second phase, which is like, okay, I've been doing this role for a while. I understand it. I'm figuring it out. And I'm just kind of getting, becoming an expert at it. And then the third phase is like, okay, what am I going to do next? Like, what is the next bigger thing that I want to tackle, usually with bigger scope? And I've kind of repeated that throughout the course of my career, going from, an engineer to a lead engineer for a pod to a technical director for a team to having, broader responsibilities, like I feel like I do here. And so I think like in a couple of years, I'd like to be, what am I trying to say? Accountable for tools and technology and process, across the scope of multiple games, right? And I'm already doing that to some extent, on League of Legends, and it's or at Riot. But that's kind of how I've seen my career progress, is just getting better at something, becoming an expert in that role, and then looking for the next role where I can kind of expand my scope and scale.
And I think that's really, really powerful in terms of, I view that as very much an entrepreneurship kind of quality as well for someone, is the fact that you have such a purpose, and like you said, your goal and your motivation was making games, right? And initially that was coding, and as you progressed, it's become a bunch of different roles, and you've managed to fulfill that purpose in a multitude of ways, across the time. And I think that's so key. It's something I'm learning. I'm learning now with the Gen Z, but also you just highlighting that as well is, yeah, just over time, is if you have a purpose, you keep driving towards it, it's going to lead you in a bunch of different directions, which are fun and you can be passionate about. But it's all with that singular purpose and goal in mind, which I think is awesome. And Aaron, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. And I was gonna say that was like key for me. And in fact, when I mentor people, I try to ask them the question, like, what do you get core satisfaction out of, right? Like, I I've never, like, my goal has never been to get into leadership. My goal wasn't to get into leadership roles. My goal wasn't to get into bigger and better leadership roles. My goal has always been like, hey, I want to make great games, and I want to make making games great, right? Like, I want to focus on that. And I'm always looking for other ways and other opportunities to do it. And it just so happened that for me, because of my skill set and the things that I like doing and the things that I'm good at, uh, I've done it by going into leadership roles, focusing on tools, technology, process, and improving those things. You know what? I don't care about tools. I don't care about technology, and I don't care about process, right? Those are just the things that I have to do the thing that I care about, which is making games, right? Like, if I was an awesome artist, which I'm definitely not, um, maybe I would be making great games by doing a bunch of art and, like, doing some of the things that the great artists that I work with do. But I'm not an awesome artist, right? Um, I've kind of seen the skills that I have, and use those to move in the direction of how do I use these, or how do I use these skills, uh, to make to have the biggest impact possible on making great games, right? And I know technology, I know tools, I've got a good sense for how to improve process, and so those are the things I do.
And I think that's a fantastic note to kind of wrap on, is that the concept of, where he never really pursued leadership positions for the sake of pursuing the leadership positions. He didn't even pursue them at all. What he did was pursue his passion and his desire to create video games, and be able to influence as much about the video game development as he could. And with that came leadership positions, came him being able to influence it more, all because he pursued a passion. And that's something that we completely support, and we think is a big part of that entrepreneurial lifestyle. And having the right mindset is that idea of just pursuing what you enjoy and what you really want to do, and finding that and kind of adapting your ideas of what your passion is and what your desires is. And as you adapt it and you change it and you kind of upgrade those ideas in your own head, you're going to naturally shift towards becoming a leader and becoming who you want to be, and everything around you will kind of mold in that same way.
Yeah, and I mean, I also say for some people they won't become leaders, and that's okay, right? Like, I work with some amazing engineers who aren't gonna follow my path even remotely, but they're super passionate about games, and the way that they make awesome games is by doing amazing architectural designs and things like that, right? Like it, I, I've never thought that leadership is particularly important, right? It's a skill, it's a role that you need, but you have to have amazing engineers and artists to make anything good, and designers to actually make video games, along with great leaders.
Absolutely, and I think as well, just the passion is, like you said, that passion is just one aspect of that kind of realm of leadership, and you have to have the other qualities to also be good at it. But that passion and being able to create an environment of creativity and fun and really enjoyment of what people are doing really starts at that passion for a leader in a leadership role, I'm sure. But yeah, we'll start to kind of wrap things up now and finish things. But Christian, I just wanted to invite you just to give maybe a final message of what you want people to take away from this podcast and from your interview. And then I'd like you just to invite people to connect with you, whether it be on LinkedIn or you have a website or something, and just that kind of final promotion of yourself.
Yeah, I think the advice that I give to people the most often, I think, is understand what you get your core satisfaction out of. Try different things, see if those feed into your core satisfaction. If they don't, it's okay. Try something else, right? Like I've talked to people and given them advice about, like, hey, you tried doing this role and you didn't like it, so go try something else, right? But a lot of it is understand what your core satisfaction is. What is the thing that makes you really excited about coming to work? Find that thing. It's probably going to be something different for you than it is for me, and that's okay. Find that thing, and focus on it, and do the things that help you meet that core satisfaction. I think that's like the best advice that I give people, is understand what you get your core satisfaction out of, and find the things that you can do that feed into that. And otherwise, I don't have like a website or anything. Riotgames.com. Play League of Legends. It's an awesome game.
I agree.
Awesome. All right, thanks so much for coming on. Christian, I'll get you to do just the kind of ending with us. So I'll just give a little promo of the podcast and say where people can find us, and then I'll say we finish as we always do. I'll count us in with a 1, 2, 3, and then we say cheers for now is our little slogan term that we have at the end of each podcast. So I'll just do that, and then we'll jump on with it. So thanks again, Christian, for coming on. We really appreciate you spending the time and giving some of your mentorship and knowledge to our audience, and I'm sure they'll really, really appreciate it. We invite any feedback on these podcasts, of course. If people want to get in contact with Christian, we can always pass on or get you to connect via LinkedIn or whatever. But you can also find this podcast over on YouTube. Will be posted over there, and then obviously go and find us on all our social media on Facebook, Instagram, and we also have a LinkedIn business page. But without further ado, we'll finish as we always do. Cheers for now. As always, head over to the Instagram and Facebook at Gen Z Journey, where you can get an inside scoop of what's going on behind the scenes, as well as seeing the exciting guests that are coming on for that week. But above all else, thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate all your participation, and we're excited you're on this journey with us. See you next time.